So this is the sixth class in the series on the metaphysics of music, which is the fourth course within a 7-subject course dealing with the 7 liberal arts and sciences. We're going to be continuing today to finish up the chapter 1 from New Age Bible Interpretation, Volume 2, Old Testament, dealing with music is magic, the occult power of music. I believe we have some extra handouts on the table of this one for those who don't have this. So today's session, we're really going to focus in on and get involved with dealing with the chakras, the 7 chakras. Last week we talked about and dealt with both the male and female energy of fire and water, of active and receptive energy. We got into talking about the use of healing temples, how music was utilized in terms of high mass, the various the harmonies, the effect that music had on the etheric double or the etheric body. We talked about how music was also used to harmonize the collective consciousness of various groups, about how when various groups come together and they participate in commonly shared music, song, that it actually starts to harmonize or connect them or bond them, not only physically but on the etheric level in terms of tuning their etheric nature to those same kinds of energies. We also talked about how mostly all other cultural groups have commonly shared songs that the total group understands, and now African people, because of the slave experience, no longer totally have consensus and agreement on commonly known and understood rhythms and songs, and how these things can be utilized to create coherence. We also talked about how each individual or aspirant, those who are aspiring to know more, be it some kind of a inner path, has their own keynote, and how different schools, different spiritual or religious orders are based upon a different keynote or a different type of energy, and how that person has to find that particular order, that particular group that resonates with their particular energies, and how all groups don't match with all people. That's why you have various different types of schools, and how various individuals will click with certain types of individuals who have a certain common kind of energy, and that others will not, and that is maybe nothing externally wrong with that. It's just people at different levels, and that people need to understand that different individuals are at different levels, and that just because physically, you're in proximity don't mean that energetically you guys match. And so just understanding these things starts to open one's consciousness and perception to greater levels of reality in terms of opposed to just the outer. We should come and start to try to look and understand the subtleties of the inner and the differences that people have. The critical question is do you understand your own needs? Do you understand your own needs? What are you really sensitive to? Where are you at, and what are you aspiring to? We also talked about individuals understanding what types of music affect you individually in different ways. And do you constantly use different types of music? We talked about percussion instruments, wind instruments, string instruments, how these different instruments affect the different types of bodies. We talked about the physical, the emotional, and the mental. We talked about the energy between the physical, soul, and spiritual, and how these different instruments affect these different bodies in different ways. So that's kind of a brief synopsis. So now we want to turn to, we also talked about the David and the harp. And what I did is I went into, I kind of shared that I would get this information. I went into the book Spiritual Astrology by C.C. Zane. And basically what this book actually does is it just takes each of the various constellations in the zodiac actually have allegorical stories, mythological fables that's connected to each of these various constellations, and the stories actually are related to the position that the constellation has within the various orbit of our Earth through these constellations, and basically the sun, but our Earth is orbiting around the sun, and the sun is orbiting through the constellations. And so thusly, as we orbit through the constellations, that means that we're at a different particular location in a cycle. And those different locations within a cycle have a different orientation, a different characteristics, almost like a cosmic season. So the various stories around the particular constellation actually kind of portray the characteristics, or really the psychosocial, psycho-spiritual characteristics that constellation plays in the cycle of growth and development, because everything that operates on the physical plane has its analogy on the spiritual. Really, the spiritual plane is the foundation that reflects itself on the physical. But because we have a tendency to interact with the physical first, it's the reverse for us. In terms of those things that act on the physical plane has its analogies on the spiritual plane. And that's why the ancients could study nature and understand divinity, because nature is actually the materialization of the divine. So anyway, so what I'm going to do is pass these out to you, and I basically brought this out because within this you will see the constellation of Lyra, or the lyre, which is the harp. And there's a story that is connected to that deals with the role that the harp, or playing the harp, or the lyre plays, and what it really is related to spiritually. Because it's talking about, all these stories are actually talking about how the various universal energies operate within us as a little universe, and then understand the relationship between these energies and our spiritual consciousness. Because all these stories, basically the ancients who were initiates put these stories in this format to kind of immortalize this knowledge, so the knowledge will be passed on from generation to generation, even though we are not aware of the inner meaning of this knowledge, because there's interesting stories and they're children's stories, or make rhymes out of them. Humanity perpetuates the stories. Then those who have the knowledge can then decipher the stories in terms of their higher meaning. So anyway, I got into that because we're talking about the harp of David, and how David played music to soothe the anxiety of King Saul in the Bible, and how it was all connected to the Temple of Solomon. And we talked about how the Temple of Solomon really deals with the temple of the soul of man. Soul of man. Saul, son, the son in you represents your spiritual self of man. The temple of man is actually your spiritual temple. And so then David represents a particular characteristic in terms of how to harmonize your consciousness with your more spiritual self. So anyway, this is all connected. Now we're going to revisit these various constellations, because language originated out of our experience with nature, and how we then told stories about our experience that generated language. And so, anyway, I'm not going to go any further than that because I want to finish the other thing on chakras. So I'm going to pass these out. But again, all these things I'm giving to you is building up your personal reference material, because all of this information is integrated, is interrelated. It is not sitting over here by itself. That's why I constantly refer back and forth to various information that I've given you in the past. So, and also, a word to the wise is sufficient, and you can then start to understand a lot of the various holidays and symbolism, because it's encouched within these various symbols. Now, these really come out of the Greek symbolism, but then understand that the Greek symbolism is an adaptation of the Kemetic. So, if we then understand the basic characteristics and not get so hung up in the actual language, then we can also start seeing how the ancients then codified their knowledge relative to the cycle of the constellations. Also, you will see the relationship that there are more than 12 constellations. There are actually, each constellation or each sign has 3 other constellations. They're broken down into decanates. And again, I'm not going to, so each sign has, a decanate is decan 10. So every 30-degree sign has 3 decanates of 10 from 1 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30. So that means that each individual who is born at a certain time also means that if I'm a Sagittarian, I'm born within the first 10 days, so I'm in the first decanate. So that decanate then actually modifies the overall sign of Sagittarius. It's then also modified. And basically, and I'm giving you some information, and it's, again, remember, astronomy, when we're talking about astronomy, astrology is the foundation really for religion. So if you really don't understand astronomy and astrology and the various relationships between the positions of the earth to the heavens and the constellations, you really won't be able to truly understand the significance of religion. And if you really want to get into that, you need to pick up and start reading Gerald Massey's work. Egypt Lies the World, Book of Beginnings, and Natural Genesis, because he definitely goes into great detail to talk about how astronomy and the celestial or stellar view created the foundation for rhetoric or language and for religion. And a little bit of that also I brought this book, The Origin and Evolution of Religion by Albert Churchward. Albert Churchward was kind of a disciple of Massey's work, and he kind of synthesized Massey's work into it's literally a smaller volume, although this is big, but Massey's is double volumes and over 3 sets. So, and what I did is, because we were talking about the Bible and got into the Pentateuch, excuse my English, we were talking about the Hebrews. And so in this book, he also starts to define who these various groups really were. Who were the Israelites, who were the Jews, who were the Hebrews, and the difference between them and the role they really played in history in terms of, as opposed to the mythology that's being given. I'll touch briefly on that. But what I wanted to talk about here is just briefly show you how each sign of the zodiac, and I guess I could use this. Each sign of the zodiac is broken down into decanates or 3s. And basically, each sign of the zodiac, like Aries is fire, Taurus is earth, Gemini is air, Cancer is water. Then Leo is fire, Virgo is earth, Libra is air, Scorpio is water. Then Sagittarius is fire, Capricorn is earth, Aquarius is air, and Pisces is water. So you have fire, earth, air, and water, the 4 elements. And then each of the signs are also, Aries is cardinal, which means it's outgoing or initiating. Taurus is fixed, and which means preserving or sustaining. And Gemini is mutable, which means it's changing or adaptable. And then again, so you have cardinal, fixed, and mutable, which is like theses, antithesis, and synthesis, in terms of the dialectical process, which is 3 modes of the Trinity. And then you have the fire, earth, air, and water, which are the 4 elements that make up the physical manifestation. All things in the physical world are made up of the 4 elements in some combination. So in actuality, the zodiac is actually a combination of the 3 modes and the 4 elements. And 3 times 4 gives you 12. So in actuality, each of the signs do not really represent an animal. The characteristics of the animal represent the quality of the sign. It's in reverse. They just chose a symbol to represent this characteristic. It is not that Aries is like a ram. basically a ram, and lambs is what? Come out in the spring because you have the newborn. So it's symbolical of a particular place in the cycle. Anyway, what I'm trying to show you briefly is that in Aries is cardinal fire or initiating fire. Taurus is sustaining earth. Air of Gemini is changing air. Each of these elements also represent fire is inspiration, future orientated. Earth is physical, material, sensation. Air is intellectual, mental, associated. And water is feelings and emotions. So then you can then start seeing how the characteristics of the sign will be a combination of these two elements in terms of the element and the mode. Anyway, I'm just showing you this because I'm trying to show you how there is actually mathematical and geometrical and actually somewhat scientific foundation for the zodiac, and not just some symbol or somebody just named some constellation just because it was arbitrary. You know, there is actually reasons behind this. So then you go then back to Cancer is cardinal, Leo is fixed, fire, Virgo is mutable, earth, Libra is cardinal, air, Scorpio is fixed, water, Sag is mutable, fire, Capricorn is cardinal, earth, Aquarius is fixed, air, and Pisces is mutable, water. And so then again you got the 4, which is represented by the square, and the 3 represented by a triangle. And again you can actually see how the pyramid comes in, right? The 4 foundation and the triangular side. So again, all of these various symbolisms, concepts, temples, structures, schools, religions, orders are all based upon primary patterns upon which the universe operates. And then humans just took them and named them and did various things with it. But these are the fundamental basis for all creation. That means that they exist in all things. So anyway, now the thing I was getting into is talking about, I showed you that because there are 3 fire signs, there are 3 earth signs, there are 3 air signs, there are 3 water signs. So then, for a decade, that's how you can figure out the decade. So for Aries, the symbol goes Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. So the first decade for Aries would be Aries, the second would be Leo, and the third would be Sagittarius. So those people born in the first third of the Aries period would be like Aries. Those born in the second third would be like Aries, Leo. So they would be modified with more than Leo energy. And those born in the last third would be more like Aries, Sagittarians. So they would have more of a Sagittarian quality as being Aries. So if you went then to Leo, it would be Leo, 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 Sag, and Leo, Aries in terms of the 3. And if you went to Sagittarius, then it would be Sag, 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 Aries, and Sag, Leo. So then each one of these have a different keyword and a different quality. And then you do the same thing for Taurus, right? I'm not going to go through all of them, but first it would be Taurus, 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 Virgo, and Taurus, Capricorn. If you go to Virgo, then it would be Virgo, 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 Capricorn, Virgo, Taurus, and then if you go to Capricorn, it would be Capricorn, 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 Taurus, Capricorn, Virgo. And you do the same thing for each of the signs. Now, what got me into all this is that for the Sagittarian energy, the first decade of Sagittarius would be Sagittarius, Sagittarius, and each one of these decades has a constellation that's related to it. And each of the constellation has a story that's related to that particular decade or constellation, and then that gives you even more information relative to the particular characteristics related to your particular nature, if you understand and read up on it. So you get more information are related to the particular energy related to the particular sign that you're related to. Scorpio would be, you can just do like this. Scorpio, you go to the next water sign. Scorpio, Pisces, you go to the next water sign. Scorpio, Cancer. You just follow it around.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Pisces and you go back to the top.
Right, which is really, this is not, it's really a circle. You know, because you got 12 signs of the zodiac. So you got Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. So then you go Aries, Leo, Sag, Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn. And basically each of the elements creates a trine with each other. Bang. And you end up with 4 triangles. We don't go into all that. But that's the way so if you just follow the circle, so if you had Scorpio, it would be Scorpio, you go to the next water sign, Scorpio, Pisces, next water sign, Scorpio with Cancer. So you just follow it around to the next water sign. That's the way the decanates go. So it's from you're going in the sun sign, and then going to the third decade. Right. Then the qualities would be more modified. It would be modified based upon that decade. Modified like depending on what decade. Like I'm sad. So I'm just reinforcing the Sagittarian quality. You know, Sag is philosophy, law, religion, long-distance journey, higher mind, professorship, blah 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 blah. Where if it was Sag Leo is more dramatic, more leadership, more want to be in the middle of things, want to take charge type stuff, right? So if it was Leo, if it was Sag, Aries is more impulsive, right? More individualistic, want to be on their own, want to go out and just start stuff but don't finish nothing, you know, so they just kind of want to go to something else with a restless energy. So then it just gives you more refinement in terms of the particular qualities or characteristics of your nature. And it has both positive and negative too. So you can see the positive and negative. You know, where Aries can be also very courageous and want to go to war or fight. They're like this Mars. Because the other thing that you would do is understand what planet rules that particular sign. Because the characteristics of that planet would then become more dominant in your nature. And so, each sign is ruled by a planet. Right? Yes, no, we're going to give it. We have a brief little astrology session here. That's how this stuff's coming out. So then Aries is ruled by Mars. Taurus is ruled by Venus. Gemini is ruled by Mercury. Cancer is ruled by the Moon. Leo is ruled by the Sun. Virgo is ruled by Mercury. Libra is ruled by Venus. Scorpio was ruled by Mars, but now it's ruled by Pluto.
How did it change?
Because the ancients didn't know that, they didn't consciously know that Pluto existed in the heavens because it wasn't visible. The 7 planets are visible with the naked eye, so they could see his movements in the sky. It was only until modern time, telescopes, that they actually discovered consciously. Although mythologically, the characteristics of Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus were included. Their characteristics were acted out in the various characters in the mythology, because within consciousness, whatever's in the universe is also in our consciousness. So we weren't conscious of it, that it physically existed. But the characteristics played out in life and nature, but we hadn't looked at the connection of it. But anyway, Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. Aquarius now is ruled by Uranus. It used to be ruled by Saturn. And Pisces is ruled by Neptune. It used to be ruled by Jupiter. It's interesting though, because the sun is the center, the sun and the moon, and then you get Mercury, Venus, Mars. In terms of how the planets, there's a whole pattern even into all that. I'm not going to go into all that. Now, all this stuff got into showing you how Sagittarius, the first decade of Sagittarius is Sagittarius. And it is the story, the harp on which angels play. If you look on the chart here dealing with the constellations, you can see right here, this is Hercules. This is right up above Hercules, right here is the harp of Lyra. And if you come straight up, this is Sagittarius up here. So if you come straight down, so if I went like this and cut a piece of pie out, that section, then these are the decanates for Sagittarius. So if I took this and started dividing it up into 12 pieces, this piece of the pie right here, here to there, would include Lyra, I think Sagitta, and Aquila. And these are the three different decanates to Sagittarius. And they have different constellations that are related to those decanates. And these are literally star clusters. These are literally, in heaven, these are star clusters that are up there. I don't know if I'm getting too complicated or whatever. But again, I'm introducing you to this stuff because these are the foundations for these stories. You know, this stuff there's method to where this stuff comes from. You know, and it's based upon, it's a science because these constellations have a particular position in the heaven. And as we circulate through that particular position, then relative to the vernal equinox, that's why we start off with astronomy. Remember, we went through astronomy, we went through geometry, we went through numbers. Now we're at harmony. So then, you then divide the year into the cross, right? The cross. And then you have Aries, which is spring, which is the vernal equinox, right? Equal day and equal night. Then you have Cancer, which then is the summer solstice, which is long day, short night. Then you have Libra, which is the fall, which is long night, well really it's equal day and equal night again. And then you have Capricorn, which is the winter solstice, which is long night, short day. So you're talking about energy shifts, energy patterns. So then we talked about how light and the combination between light and dark energy actually then has an impact on the secretion of hormones in our system. That goes into our nervous system, goes to our bloodstream, it impacts the endocrine glands, it impacts growth of cells, growth of your body, emotions, and all these various things that are constantly being played upon by the changing energy patterns as we cycle through the universe. So that means these different positions literally make what? Different geometrical patterns in different phases within a cycle. So anyway, so I'm just trying to, again, try to give you some orientation in terms of what's behind all these fables and stories because it's science. It's natural science. It's not just something people made up. You know, it's not just, mythology is not just made up. Mythology is a language, an ancient language. It's a scientific language if you understand what the terminology really means concerning natural phenomena. So, from that, and out of all that got into talking about the symbolism of the heart. Fall with symbols, that symbol is Libra. Right. And you also can see, if you understand the seasonal changes that are occurring at that time, you can understand the nature of the sign. Because those things born at a particular time partake of the quality of that time. And that goes all the way back to, remember we were reading on the handout on harmony and environment, and how we said how the environment then things that are a product of the environment have the qualities of that environment, and the energetic quality of that environment produces form that's equivalent to the energy of the environment. So that's not only true for what? Grasslands, swamps, forests, desert. It's also true cosmically because it's all about environments. Right? So anyway, I said to say that Libra is what? Balance between day and night. Where Aries is the initiation of new energy. It's a new impulse. If you look at spring, if you look at life, if you look at flowers, if you study agriculture, ancient people were heavily into agriculture, you literally will see what? Sprouts coming up out the ground, sap in the tree is running, new life is, babies are popping up all over everywhere, be it new flowers, new animals, new insects and everything. So life is springing forward. So it's spring. Where in the fall, what's happening? The leaves are falling, plants are falling. It's fall. So again, there is method in the so-called madness. All right, now that took me into all that. That's why this course is a 20-year course, right? Because there's really there is a simple answer, but the simple answer has a complex explanation because it's tied to all this stuff. But in here, on page 300, and I'll read just a little bit to give you some flavor for it. It's called The Harp on Which the Angels Play. It was by no accident that the crown, which implies the great white throne, and the harp on which the angels play are so located in heaven that they picture adjoining decanates of the celestial cycle. So if you look at your celestial cycle and you find the harp, down below the harp there's also a crown down toward the bottom. So it says, I'm reading from Spiritual Astrology by C.C. Zane, page 300. And it's talking about the decanate, the first decanate of Sagittarius. It says, and if we consider Sagittarius as ruling not only far travel, but also the highways on which such travel is made, when the sun, ruler of gold, in this sign gives rise to the thought of golden streets. Thus do we have a zodiacal origin of an afterlife and a crown or throne relating to the last of Scorpio, to streets paved with gold, and to angels playing eternally on harps before the throne. You see in biblical scripture here, right? Cities of gold, harps, angels playing on harps. And it's really talking about the transition from Scorpio to Sagittarius. And it's indicated by the next decanate by Lyra, picturing the Sagittarius section of the sign of religion. Basically, Sagittarius is the sign of religion. No, you don't. Oh, here. Yeah, I did make some. You can pass these out. All right. Now, I don't want to go too far because this is not big major. But I have to go where I have to go, so that's where I'm going. I'm not going to read all this stuff, though, because you can read this stuff. So anyway, the intimate relationship existing between both religion and the underworld of Pluto, and Pluto rules Scorpio, right? And so in the Greek mythology, right, Pluto was the lord of the underworld. And Scorpio deals with the mysteries or hidden things, or going down into the depths and pulling things out. Because Scorpio energy usually deals with secrets. If you didn't know Scorpio people, there's always more to them than meets the eye, because they always have a lot of hidden things. They don't reveal everything unless they really trust you. So it says, the intimate relationship existing between both religion and the underworld of Pluto, co-ruler of Scorpio, and between harmony and this invisible realm is set forth in the Greek story of Orpheus and his lost bride, what's that? Eurydice. Pluto, ruler of the sign of sex, on his higher or eagle side, relates to perfect union, to regenerate marriage, and to the union of true soulmates. On his inversive or scorpion side, it relates to separation, to antagonism, and to dissolution. We're talking about the two sides of Scorpio. The harmonies within ourselves are chiefly set in motion by our thoughts. Here's the key, because we're talking about harmony. The harmonies within ourselves are chiefly set in motion by our thoughts. And as the heart pictures a section of the sign ruling the higher mind, and as thoughts are ruled by Mercury, Greek legend quite appropriately held that the famous harp on which Orpheus could play so sweetly that rivers ceased to flow and savage beasts forgot their wildness was given to him by Mercury. So again, you see they're actually just portraying celestial energies through mythological stories. Yes, ma'am.
Could you relate those names to connect people?
Mercury is Tahuti. I need to go back and look it up. I can find that out. Because basically, though, Orpheus is probably similar to Heru. But don't quote me on that. I'll have to go and look it up. Orpheus, the master harpist of all time, married his ideal, his soulmate, Eurydice, to whom he was tenderly devoted. Apparently, however, their adjustment was not so successful as that which the biblical Jacob made. For the serpent with which Orpheus still wrestles bit Eurydice. This is the lower serpent, or the serpent of the desire. Instead of attaining the crown, which pictures triumph over the sign of death, she was bitten by the serpent, died, and passed to the realm of Pluto. Orpheus was disconsolate. He could not reconcile himself to the loss of his beloved mate. Therefore, to recover her, he made a visit to the infernal regions. Taking his lyre along, he played so sweetly that the wheel of Exxon stopped. The stone of Sisyphus stood still. Tantalus forgot his burning thirst, and even the Furies relented. More important still, so enraptured did Pluto become with the music, and so moved by the depth of Orpheus' sorrow that finally he agreed to restore Eurydice to him. This reunion of Orpheus and his lost Eurydice is one of the most touching incidents of legendary lore. In the story, first of all, we have set forth that the abuse of sex is destructive, even when those married are ideally suited to each other. It led to the death of Eurydice. Then there is set forth the power of harmonious thoughts engendered by love to find the object of this affection, even across the borderline of death. The invisible realm of Pluto can be contacted and controlled through the harmonies engendered by pleasant emotional states and loving thoughts more successfully than in any other way. Was that Ixion was tied to a wheel in hell that continually whirled around, keeping him in perpetual torture. Sisyphus in the infernal regions was condemned to roll a stone to the summit of a hill, but the stone always rolled back, thus making his punishment eternal. Tantalus in the underworld was in a pool of water that flowed from him whenever he attempted to take a drink, causing him perpetual thirst. But the music of Orpheus had so powerful an influence in the region that these condemned souls were undergoing punishment that their torture ceased. Those who have attained the laurel crown of adaptship not only work upon the physical plane, but often also use their ability to release from suffering those who have passed to the afterlife in a state of mind which keeps them in torture. The suicide, for instance, often like Ixion, is tied to the will of the mental images which caused him thus to try to flee from reality. By taking his own life, he hoped to free himself from a distress which seemed too great for him to bear. But he merely transferred his suffering to another region. Round and round he goes with images of the awful conditions from which vainly he hoped to escape. Pluto, as the story goes, in permitting the reunion of Orpheus with his long-lost soulmate, imposed one condition, that the musician was not to look behind him until he was out of Pluto's realm. Orpheus promised to obey this instruction, but as he was traveling upward and near the region of the upper world, Eurydice, following at his heels, he forgot his promise and looked back at his cherished bride, whereupon she vanished, never more to be seen. This looking back, of course, as in the story of Lot's wife, returned to a pillar of salt, is a turning of thoughts to a contemplation of the conditions and experiences of the past. This tunes the individual in on the old desires, sets in motion the vibrations of the past, and again attracts to him the external condition from which he is fleeing. If we are to enjoy a condition of greater harmony and bliss, and if we are to prevent separations similar to those which have occurred in the past, we must avoid thinking the thoughts and thus entering the vibratory conditions that in the past have resulted in discord and separation. This is the key to the whole thing right here, for one of the keys. And blah, blah, blah. You can read the rest of that. Jumping over, and this is really I really wanted to get to the next page, some people's cards. It says, the crown, as on the second page, 305, the crown as represented by the king, and indicating a decade of the sign ruling those in Pluto's realm brought into association with the devotion decade. So this is talking about the decade of Scorpio and the first decade of Sagittarius. So this mythology is really talking about the different celestial energies and how they relate to each other. And it came to pass when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took an harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. David among the constellations is pictured with his harp as one of the twins, which rules the hands. But the harp itself, as a separate constellation, quite appropriately depicts the most religious decade of the whole zodiac. Of this harp, a master wrote. The most religious decade of the zodiac is Sagittarius, because Sagittarius is the decade of religion, and so the double Sagittarius is in the most religious section of the zodiac, if you follow what I'm talking about. Because Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, is the religious urge. Anyway, harp divine, whose strings the angels tune and set in motion sweet waves of music that vibrate round the spheres and bring to man the tidings of his once celestial state, that says in tones of heavenly sweetness to faint and struggling souls, look up and onward, thy spirit calls thee home. God Jehovah is, and thou must be. Now look at the words here and see how they're related to certain things. You can catch what it says. It says, harp divine, a divine harp. That means a harp has 7 strings. 7. Right? So we're talking about really the 7 chakras, because the chakras, the strings in the spinal system, are the nerves. And upon the nerves, all the thought forms vibrate as the energy from the nerves moves from the parts of the body to the brain, which then creates a vibration because it's electromagnetic energy, because what? You have literally the synapses, right? The various impulses are transmitting electrical charges that move from the point of contact, be it hand, ear, eyes, touch, taste. It stimulates a vibrational energy that moves along the nervous system, that then moves along the spinal column, that crosses all the various centers in the spine and terminates in the brain, that then is registered as an electromagnetic impulse, that then registers on the consciousness as some type of a thought. That means also thoughts then trigger electromagnetic frequencies that then also vibrate through the system. So, part divine, whose strings the angels tune. Angels are like angles. The various angles of cycles create different vibrations, different energies, which are different characteristics. Whose strings the angels tune and set in motion sweet waves of music that vibrate round the spheres. What are the spheres in the body? The various chakras are spheres. And we're going to get to that. So just keep this thought, because we're going to get to that. And bring to man or humanity the tidings of his once celestial state. That means we talked about the last 2 weeks, we talked about how our physical form is an extension of the divine. So that means that at one time we were in a celestial state. We are still in a celestial state, but our consciousness doesn't recognize it anymore because our consciousness is focused on different levels, be it the physical level, the emotional level, the lower mental level, or etc. Your consciousness creates your reality. So if your consciousness is so concerned about these lower things, then you are no longer conscious of your celestial state. Because energy follows thought. So if your thought is focused on bills and racism or slavery or kids or envy or mad or clothes or whatever, then that's the level of your reality. So then if you elevate your thoughts, then you will elevate your... Now go back to when we talked about the psychosynthesis, right? The lower unconscious, the middle unconscious, the higher unconscious, the self, the field of consciousness, and the transpersonal self. All this stuff is interrelated. It's all the same thing from different schools talking about the same concept. So if you can start seeing this consistent pattern, you will see the same pattern. It's all the same. Just different words, different concepts, but it's all the same thing. Once you can get a kind of a grounding in the fundamental pattern, then you can get centered. And your direction can become focused, which then will enable you to accelerate your evolution and your growth. It's what the process of initiation is really all about. It's an accelerated process to help accelerate the process of evolution through systematic techniques. Just like you got baby walkers and stuff now, right, that helps accelerate the baby's ability to start walking. Because it's practicing by being in the walker and walking around, so its muscles and because every time it makes a step, that's an electromagnetic impulse that goes to the brain and creates a pathway in the brain where the brain then can recognize what to do the next time it steps. And so as you do more practice, repetition, you then become more familiar and it becomes easier for you to do the particular thing. So how many people last week took 20 minutes, 3 days a week to study their material? Hands. Don't lie. Raise your hands high. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out of 15. Is that 50%? No. So if we were on Saturday night, no, it was at Tuesday night basketball, and the commentaries was giving your stats. How would your stats look if you're only shooting 50%, 49%, 30%? I'm just giving you some analogies here in terms of how you answer your question. Good question? Okay, we'll come back.
No, I got it.
Okay.
You were saying that it was the progression of spiritual evolution.
Right.
So, in other words, if we had never lost this information that you're giving us now, and then we're getting back into, because we were once on a level of higher spiritual elevation than we are now, right?
Some. Yes.
As a society, as a whole. We're
Some.
not there now,
Some.
we know that.
Some.
So if
Right.
we had never lost anything, you know what I'm saying? Where would we be now as far as that evolution? I mean, would we be comparable to what we consider aliens about now?
So are you indicating that aliens are at this high level of spiritual attainment?
In Kemet, didn't they believe that those people had progressed to a level where they could actually move objects? I mean, because they still haven't figured out about the pyramids.
Oh, yeah, sure. They had all, yeah, sure.
So if we had never lost anything in our progress at this point, I'm wondering, where would we be right now if we had continued that? I'm just curious.
But see, the thing is, you have to look at that in the context of the whole development of the human race on the planet. So that means that there were pockets of humans that were scattered all over the planet. Kemet was very unique because of the constant overflowing of the Nile that consistently replenished the soil and created a fertile base to generate a food supply, a consistent food supply. That consistent food supply then created the development of longevity in terms of cities and consistent observation, and also the clearness of the desert sky, lack of rain, then allowed for direct observation of the heavens. That uniqueness created that acceleration in terms of Kemet becoming that, the mouthpiece and the culmination of this kind of knowledge and information. But the other seeds of the human race had scattered to different parts of the globe. That means that they then were being molded by different conditions. And so thusly we have to look at it as a whole. Because see, the ultimate goal is for the total spiritualization of the total planet, which is had a beginning and has an end. So that's just kind of like, what is it? I want to say conjecture or something. Like, what would it have been like if each of us have been raised in a family where were raised up in this knowledge? Okay, we can conject all kind of possibilities. How could it be if the planet at this point in time was being motivated by and used as a basis for decision-making, policy, creativity, where things could be? Okay, well, that's the goal. Because at one point in time, the whole thing about Atlantis is that we were at a high spiritual level, but people start to ego trip and misuse the power that then set in destructive energies into motion that then eventually cause for the destruction of that civilization. But all of that had to be seen in the experience of the whole human race. All those things are providing experiences for us to learn and eventually learn our lessons so that when we elevate ourselves to this higher level of consciousness and use the full capacity of our brain, we have become wise and won't no longer be governed by the lower nature. So it's all a part of the process. All of this, slavery, is part of the process. Everything that has gone on is for the learning and the education of the human race to eventually teach it the proper behavior so it can evolve itself to its full potential. So I always want to say, when we talk about something, you should hopefully talk about it in the context of the total cycle. Because that lets you understand what the purpose and meaning of that particular phase of the cycle is. Just like teenager is a particular cycle of the whole maturation cycle. Different ages is a particular phase in the whole life cycle. But then do you understand the phases? Because if you understand the phases, you understand what is the appropriate behaviors and the urges that are happening during that particular phase. But most of us don't look at life as a cycle. And then that's a spiraling cycle. So anyway, so that's my answer to your question. Right. Now I want to hear, yes, sir.
In science and meditation, Sarah says that thought forms can cause earthquakes.
Can cause what?
Earthquakes.
Right. Earthquakes. Because energy is vibration. And so then if you have enough discordant or negative vibrations or energy, it creates a disruptive energy that will have physical consequences. And vice versa. If people are thinking at a certain spiritual level in a collective way, they can create a harmonious environment that then will have impact on the environment, physically have an impact on the environment. There's a book called, two books. One is called The Earthquake Generation, and one is called The Jupiter Effect. I had to find which one of them, but it talks about, there's certain speculations how certain Pueblo Indian civilizations, possibly, they don't know how they became depopulated. Some of it, they were speculating that some of the energies became so negative that it created a certain type of energy projection in the environment that then created a diminishing of rainfall, which then dried up the land, which then destroyed the food supply, which then eventually the people had to move off and move someplace else because people follow food supply, which goes back to the reason why Kemet was such a great civilization, because all over the world, when there were other geological changes, earthquakes and tornadoes and other, various geological changes, Kemet remained consistent. Every year the Nile overflowed and brought new life for hundreds of thousands of years, which allowed them to develop observatories and have documentation for over 3 cycles, 3 great years. And great years, 26,000 years. So anyway, but that's other stuff. If you want to get into that, get into Albert Churchward, Origin and Evolution of Religion. He has another book, Origin and Evolution of the Human Race. Let me finish this, and I want to get into the chakras. Okay, it says, so I just talk, so we're talking about the whole thing about the spirit calling you home. God, Jehovah is, and thou must be. Remember we talked about Jehovah was Yad-He, Vad-He, which represents fire, earth, air, and water, and the 4 elements, and the harmonious combination of those elements. It says, but in the case of Saul, his thoughts were so morose and savage that the inspiration or vibratory level of intelligence he often tuned in on was discordant. Instead of tuning in with prayer and devotion, he tuned in with anger and revenge. And following the law that governs contact in the invisible realm, he thus came into rapport with entities of the same general vibratory level as his thoughts and of the same desires. They were malignant, and finding the avenue thus open to them, they took possession of the king. Basically talking about, on a spiritual level, like attracts like. So then whatever level you're thinking, you then open yourself up to that level of existence and all the other related behaviors that are connected to that level of thinking. The one way to cure a condition of this kind is to stimulate thoughts of an entirely different character. When the dominant thoughts are harmonies, this immediately cuts off all approach of unseen entities whose essential nature is discord. When the thoughts are elevated as sweet music has an influence to raise them to noble aspiration, it tunes the consciousness in on a corresponding invisible plane and automatically cuts off any association with evil spirits, evil thoughts, evil levels of consciousness. Thus, when thus understood, the method which was applied by David to soothe the troubled spirit of Saul and thus cure his obsession is the most approved and successful method that can be applied to such cases today. It also explains much of the value to be derived from devotional exercises and prayer. Devotional exercises accompanied by appropriate music are a great help to tune the feelings and emotions in on the plane of intelligence corresponding to such high emotional states. if they perform their office properly, this raises the consciousness to a much higher plane than is its customary vibratory rate. It brings the consciousness into touch with invisible entities on the inner plane who are higher in spirituality and in wisdom than the devotee and enlist their help. Discouragement and feelings of self-disapproval keep the mind tuned in on the lower states of Pluto's realm, the underworld. But faith and devotion tend to enable the individual to rise above all such sordid and discordant feelings so that they, for the time being, are no longer troublesome, no longer attract discordant intelligence from the invisible. Like the music of David's heart, faith and devotion soothe and lift the thoughts. For as the text states, on every plane harmony is life and discord is death. So now go back to how we talk about the imagery and energy that is constantly being projected relative to how black people or African American people or African people view themselves. So it constantly keeps the vibratory rate of your energy or your thought forms focused on a certain level, which then keeps the feelings and the thinking at that level, and then you have related behaviors that are equated to that level. It also keeps us focused on the past, but only on a limited part of our past that is the negative part of the past, that then again reinforces that state of consciousness that then perpetuates the past into the present. That's why black people self-destruct. Because we're constantly recycling this negative way of thinking and feeling. So now, moving back to the other sheet, I got into that talking about the heart of David, and we went on this journey, but that's what it's all about. So now, I wanted to get into the breath. Man. Okay, let's see. So on Music as Magic on page 174, the middle paragraph, we talked about this last week. Remember I gave you the handout on rhythm? It talked about, that was the handout I gave for you to review. And this was the handout on the various rhythms. So is this chart here dealing with the various rhythms of the body. And it also was one that was talking about the astrological world cycles. Now this is all appropriate. Now I'm telling you something too. This stuff gets pulled together. It's an inner pull. Because certain threads come out and I start pulling this stuff together and it's all related. But it's more related than I even know. Because then as we start going through it, stuff starts tying together at a whole other level. And why am I saying this? I had not planned on going through this. Because I put this on the 12 signs of the zodiac and the tribe of Israel because of Dan. Because remember in the handout, it was talking about the temple of Dan, how each temple had its own keynote. And the different temples were equated with the different tribes. And the different tribes have a keynote that's connected to each sign of the zodiac. So then I also passed out the sheet that talked about how each sign of the zodiac has its own color, its own sign, its own gems, its own stones, its own metals. So then you can start seeing how the different religious orders that were connected to a particular temple use those various elements in terms of the clothes they wear, the robes, the jewelry, the crowns. All those things were really representing the astrological, astronomical characteristics or the keynote that particular tribe represented, or a particular temple. Because in Kemet, the different tribes, or the different cities, were also keyed to a particular astronomical position that then also represents certain characteristics. And that became the guideline for the creation of the hymns and the songs and the various scriptures and the costuming and what time they did the rituals and ceremonies, because each hour of the day has a certain keynote that's related to the signs. Each day of the week, each month, each year, each season. So once you become aware of this, then you submit to the cosmic order, and that becomes the guide for creation. Where now we have reversed everything in the Western world, and the ego or the lower nature of man then is reflecting off of whatever it's tripping off of and creates off of that. And thus that's why society is so discordant, which means discordance is death. Now, that got us into the 666 in the lower nature of the lower mind. I said that I was going to get you handouts on 666 and where that comes from. So here are the handouts in 666, and it comes from this book called Apocalypse Unveiled or Unsealed by James Pricey, P-R-Y-S-E, and it's published by Health Research. They do a whole lot of reprints and things of that nature. But in here, it basically deals with the esoteric interpretation of the revelation of St. John. But St. John, or John, is Judah, or Leo, which also deals with heart or purpose. So then you can start taking this stuff and truly understanding what it's really talking about. Because in your chart, see, everybody in their natal chart has all 12 signs of the zodiac in your natal chart, but it's in different positions, different relationships, with different emphasis. So you can start taking this information and then start understanding what's your particular purpose here. Because everybody's called here to provide some solution or some part of the solution of the time you find yourself existing in. Because everything is connected. The physical is an expression of the invisible. But anyway, briefly to go over this, then we'll get back to the physiological. Because basically the book of Revelations, or the book of revealing, Aquarius deals with I know, and the age of Aquarius is the age of the revealing. It's the time where what was known by the few will become known by the many. And so that's what the work is all about. So now if you look at this, again, what? Boom. First of all, it's in 4. But the point was, I was showing you how, it's interesting too, because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The numbers of the names. And so basically they say that in ancient times, each letter represented a number, because every letter has its own vibratory rate, has its own number. So the word really then could be equated to different vibratory rates or different energies. So equivalent names had the same energy. So you could switch names around, but if you understood the true writing, you could decipher what's really being said. So I could write you a message and talk about Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, and somebody think that's a nursery rhyme, but you could take it and break down the numerical symbolism and decipher what I'm really trying to tell you. And so initiates communicated to each other in symbolism and in code. And all the scriptures were written by initiates for initiates. So they're mystery books. And unless you have the coding, you can't really decipher what we're really talking about. Because literally people think in the last days there's going to be this 7-horned beast that's going to come out the sky, there's going to be some trumpets blowing, right? And these people are going to rise, 144,000 are going to go up into the sky. But I'm going to show you, hopefully tonight, how 144,000 is the numerical value of the summation of the 7 chakras, because each chakra has a number based upon the level of energy and it vibrates at. And if you add up all the numbers of the chakras, the total number is 144,000. So those who are saved, those who have been opened up to 7 seals and are now vibrating at the frequency of 144,000. And so it's not the chosen people, The chosen people are those who have chosen to walk the way of the straight and narrow, who become God's children, because you're following God, or the harmony of the universe. So you see how the Hebrews took the mythology, personalized it, and used it to oppress other people.
Have you ever had this conversation with a Christian about the 144,000?
Sure.
And their response to you was?
That ain't what it say in the Bible. Where you get that from? You talking all that crazy esoteric stuff.
How do you get them to open up to
How do you get, you don't really try. Remember what we said, that people are going to be attracted to things at their level of consciousness. Some people are so crystallized into what they're into, they're never going to change. So all you can do is move to try to elevate your consciousness, and as you contact with your calling and start to express this consciousness through your particular avenue, you will then start to touch other souls, who then will become more conscious. And then it will be a quantitative change to a qualitative change. You really can't worry about trying to make people change. All you can do is try to be as in tune and as creative and try to fulfill your potentiality, where then you become an inspiration to those who are ready to be inspired. That's all you can do.
Needs to check this out. I was listening to NPR tonight. They were talking about how the Catholic religion in Africa, when they went down there and colonized everything, they had all these. There's like hundreds of thousands of African Christians right now.
Right, millions.
But all of them now they're changing what they've done virtually in every country. They've adopted personal things from their own their culture, and they've started infusing it into the church. Mm-hmm. So now, particularly the thing that they said is on healing, okay? Mm-hmm. So, and the Catholic Church has been struggling with, all these people, they believe in Jesus Christ, etc. Mm-hmm. But they have employed all these, their traditional healings and that type of thing, and their churches are very strong, and the Catholic Church is having to change as a result of their influences, Mm-hmm. And it's all over the continent. So it's interesting that you see African people following their own minds, their own traditions, mm-hmm. and they're affecting this monolithic Catholic Church as a result of their changes, mm-hmm. which I thought was interesting.
All those are seeds, still great change.
But an excellent example of that is Cuba and the Clinton. Exactly what you're saying,
Catholicism.
Concept of taking hold. Of course, you got the Caribbean region, but you see Europe coming together with it. Now you got the Clinton, and some Europeans call it something weird, but we call it the Clinton. And it is about the home to years.
Right.
St. Peter is the ordained.
Right. So it's, again, the characteristics as opposed to the specific little interpretation. So just briefly, I want to just show you how, like I was telling you about the 666 and the lower mind that relate to the beast. Because we had talked about the lower mind, the higher mind, and then the whole thing about where the mark of the beast, what it really is. And the 666 comes from the numerical equivalent to the name Hephron, which if you take the letters and you can look over at the chart and see how the different levels, the Greek names for that has a numerical equivalent. That numerical equivalent then is total into a particular number value, and then that number value for the lower mind, which is Hephron, relates to 666, and that's what they're really talking about, as opposed to the little interpretation that people walking around with a 666 in their head. But what are they really saying? They're saying that their head is marked by the lower mind, so their thoughts are operating from the lower level. So they have the mark of the beast. So there's like truths that are misinterpreted. And if you look at the inside of it, you can really see it's true in what they're saying, but the reference point is not correct. Right. Yes, sir.
But that scripture goes a little bit further and says that without the mark of the beast, you won't be able to buy or sell or trade. going to see a thing like that, and how do you equate that with the way he said
They won't be able to buy, sell, or trade what?
it's good and service?
I don't know. I'd have to go look it up and look at the specifics of it. You can equate it in a number of ways. Because the lower mind, what is the purpose of the lower mind, the lower self? Let's look at metaphysical. That's how I show you how. If you understand basic metaphysical concepts, you can figure stuff out. Right? So, what is the purpose of the lower mind? When we did the sevenfold constitution of humans, right, it takes us back to this, right? So the lower mind, or the lower self, equates with what? Have you studied this stuff? See, if you don't study when the questions pop up, you'll be confused. If you study your material, when that word comes, the equivalent will come into your mind and be able for you to answer what it's saying. Because what is the purpose of the lower self?
Yoda said it's the lower common functions,
What's the purpose? The purpose. That's describing what it is. Now that's our purpose, but what is the function or the purpose of the lower self?
Or the living in the material world.
All of that's pieces of it, but that is not really saying the lower self is supposed to be the slave or the vehicle for the higher self. The lower self is the way that we make contact with experience, with the physical plane, with this concrete reality. Because when we talk about the overall journey, is that spirit or consciousness is moving to become super conscious, to become conscious of itself. So to become conscious of itself, it has to then be able to experience itself, so they can register and then know it. So then it develops a vehicle, or the vehicle, so it could register the experiences and become aware or to know that it is, as opposed to just being but doesn't know it is. So thusly your lower self is the vehicle, like your car. It takes you from one point to another. So it's an instrument, it's a vehicle for you to be able to do things, but under the guidance of the higher self. So the beast is like the animal. And so what do you do with animals? You domesticate them so they then become of service for a greater whole. So when you look at symbolism and mythology, where you have various beasts who are being tamed, what the symbol is telling you is that it's the goal that you have to do. You have to tame the beast in you, your lower nature. You have to gain mastery of your lower self, your physical self, your emotional self, your lower mental self. You have to tame the beast.
So what he's saying is buying and selling. This is kind of trick right there. Without the largest beast, you won't have the vehicle to represent the higher self, right?
Right.
So you have to have much beast to know going forward.
Right. Well, under the guidance of what? You know what I'm saying?
Under the guidance of,
Or the higher self, right.
so it's necessary to have that 60%, but unfortunately, it's just misinterpreted.
It's not the end in itself. It's like this society now. We have technology and things, but what is it being used for? Is it being used to free and liberate humanity, or more impoverish humanity? So it's an instrument, but what is the instrument? What is the root of the instrument? That's why the Western world is playing a role in terms of interconnecting the total globe. We have the capacity right now to have this class on a global level. The capacity is here to do that. The will is not here as yet to do that. But because greed motivates people more right now than spiritual aspiration, then the universe is using that to connect all this stuff up. It's a motivator. That's like during the Renaissance, they encouched the knowledge in alchemy. But the motivator was you could convert lead to gold. Literally, they thought they could convert lead to gold. But what they were talking about is lead represents the lower self. And gold represents the higher self. So it's the same thing. What they were really talking about is the alchemical or the process of transforming the lower self into the higher self. But because people were not aspiring because of leadership and what people's conscience was, they would not aspire to do that because it changes. So then by equating it with gold and riches, then you had royalty subsidizing alchemists to go in their workshops and do all this studying and write these books and stuff, which they did under symbolism, but they were really studying other kind of things. You had other people who were literally out there trying to drinking all kind of mercury and all kind of stuff, killing themselves, thinking they're going to literally make these transformations. But the point I'm trying to make is that there is a role or a place for the material and physical plane. It's not an either-or situation. It's about a marriage or unification between the two. And so I can go back, but what I was also trying to show you, I haven't studied the literal, total part of that scripture to be able to exactly say what we're talking about, but I can guarantee you it's related to what I said. Yeah.
Mentioning on the top, we have the top three.
Mm-hmm.
Which you can look at every time, and the third one, the higher mind, you have that ego, you.
Right, Jesus, right. Jesus is the higher mind. Right. Right. It's just people taking the wisdom teachings and encountering in the different formats related to a particular culture, a particular time and space. But anyway, that's another lecture. We want to get on to the Seventh Chakra. Well, hey, let's do this. We'll finish up on this chart here, and then we'll start up next week on this chakra. Huh? Well, we got into chakras a little bit. You got it in your handouts. You guys should be telling me about the chakras. Because we had them for 3 weeks. You had the handouts for 3 weeks. All I do is go back and study the material. But because I've been studying it for so much, I can bring so much more to it. But if you went back and studied that material, you'd be here and be able to articulate it. But anyway, we'll finish up on these physiological cycles and respiration and concentration. Because then I also had some talking about the breath here and how we breathe fire. But anyway, let's see how much time we got. So 178, music is magic. It says, in the stillness and peace of the mind, the flowers bloom in the soul according to a rhythm embodied in them. Knowing this, it is readily understandable why the Psalms have been called the perfect flowers of religious song. Indeed, we realize that the really important office of the Psalms is not in the intellectual content, but in the subtle rhythms which we experience by singing and chanting them. It is the rhythm which plays upon the 7 flower centers and causes them to open to the spiritual sun. Thus, the Hierophant of the mystery, the Hierophant is a master of the mystery, and chanting the 7 sounds for the neophyte, prolonged that one which vibrated the particular flower whose opening was desired, passing rapidly over the others until the purposed result was achieved. So thus the master, each chakra is tuned to a different vibratory rate. So then if we take the location of the 7th chakra handout and we turn to, which one of these things in here? Let's see. Turn to the back, the 3rd sheet from the back, 4th sheet, let's see, 3rd sheet, 4th sheet from the back, 4th sheet from the back. This table right here that says the association between the 7 rays and the particular musical forms and instruments. This comes out of the book, The Secret Power of Music. And basically what it shows you is how, is this the one? This is not the one. You don't have that? You don't. He has it back there. part? Oh, okay. Some have it, some don't. Okay, some got it, some don't.
No, if you are a major chakra in the area, somebody they know it.
No, I'm at the association between 7 rays and particular musical form.
We don't have that one.
We don't have that one. Let's see. Let's see. Another handout? Somebody bring those back.
The last page.
Some people don't have it.
No, it's not in there. The table 5, right?
Right.
The article is location of the 7th chapter.
Okay, maybe those are not there. Anyway, I have to get those. Okay. But that doesn't give me what I want anyway. Okay, forget it. I'll get that for next. I'll have it in next time. Anyway, the point was that for each chakra, it has a certain, related to a certain sign, a certain planet, a certain color, a certain note. So then by intoning the particular sound of that vowel and that note, it then activates because you set up a sympathetic resonance between the sound and the vibratory rate of that particular chakra. So then and also by dealing with mantra, because one form of yoga is mantra yoga, and that's the yoga of sound. So then one goes into a meditation, and then one intones certain sounds. And because each of the chakra has their own sounds, you can intone those particular sounds and set up a resonance in your head that then sets up a similar, like a tuning fork, that particular vibration, and it will open up that level of consciousness and then allow you to then contact those entities, those thought forms that resonate or exist at that level of consciousness. Now you're not going to sit down the first time and just do this. You have to, and then also your physical body has to be somewhat in good condition. You know, that means your diet and just, a certain level of purification of the system, because if your system starts to set up a certain vibratory rate, and if your body is out of alignment in terms of its physiological or anatomical systems, then you're not going to get a pure vibration. That's why they practice asceticism. That's why a lot of times when you want to go into certain altered states of consciousness or contact certain levels of consciousness, you would fast, because then that would purify your system and make you more sensitized. That when you got into prayer or into meditation, you would then be in a greater sympathetic resonance in terms of your system would be more attuned to vibrate at that level of whatever the conscious or thought form you were holding. That's why certain prayers consist of certain thought forms, certain energies. And so then as one engages in that prayer, they set up that resonance in their consciousness that then, again, starts to vibrate at that level, and then you attract to yourself things equivalent with that level of consciousness. Or at another level, you can open up your mind and then gain information or knowledge or solutions to problems equivalent with that level of consciousness. That's why meditation is the central most important thing that we need to practice in whatever form is most meaningful for yourself. But anyway, so then the 7 flowers may also be called the musical light of the soul. Their location and significance, briefly stated, are as follows. All 7 of the musical lights lie along the spinal cord. That is, to the spiritual vision they appear to lie there, but they are not physical. They are etheric and astral, and serve as conductors of the vital essence which flows through them into the nerve plexuses which they interpenetrate. Look at the second page. First look at the first page on the location of 7 chakras. It gives you the location, the base, the sacral, the solar plexus, the heart, the throat, the forehead, and the crown. The second page then gives you how they appear in terms of their whirling centers of energy that connect with an energy field that runs along the spinal column. Because along the spinal column, you have all the nerves, and those nerves project electromagnetic impulses, and anytime you have electromagnetic charge at 90 degrees to the flow of electrons, you set up an electromagnetic field. When you have electromagnetic field, that means then that the atoms in that field are charged to a certain energy. When you have an electromagnetic field, another electromagnetic field can then polarize electromagnetic field. So if I have an electromagnetic field and I bring a larger electromagnetic field in contact with that, the electrons in the lesser electromagnetic field will align themselves in the same pattern as the greater electromagnetic field. That's why it's important for people to understand and learn basic science. And we as black people run from science. That's why it's very hard for us to understand the impact of certain things on us, because we don't understand the biochemical, biological, electromagnetic operation of our own self. But we don't really understand liberal arts, because liberal arts, and underneath liberal arts is biophysiology. So we're talking about art, we're talking about color, patterns, vibrations, sound, and how do you experience that? You experience it through your nervous system. So anyway, but look at the patterns. You're talking about vortexes of energy, whirling energy. So anytime you have energy whirling in a cycle, it creates a vortex that can suck energy in. These are then, go to the next page. It then shows how each of the various levels has its own frequency that creates an electromagnetic field that radiate out from the body. And each of those chakras then relate to a particular level. Etheric level, emotional level, mental level, astral level. Then you have a higher etheric level, a celestial level, and a ketheric. A ketheric is basically the divine will. Kether is related, if you look into Kabbalah, Kether is the first sephirah, or the first energy field that comes down into manifestation. So Kether would almost be like Ptah, coming out of noon. That's the one that is in all things. So anyway, again, see, all this stuff is the same thing. So then you go to the next page. Major chakras in the area of the body, they nourish. So each of the chakras nourish a particular part of the body. So the base has a color, red, and it nourishes the adrenals, the endocrine glands, and also governs the spinal column and the kidneys. The sacral region is orange and relates to the gonads and reproductive system. The third one is the solar plexus, yellow, and it relates to the pancreas, stomach, liver, gallbladder, and nervous system. The heart, green, is the thymus, heart, blood, vagus nerve, circulatory system. Throat is blue, thyroid, bronchial and vocal apparatus, lungs, alimentary canal. Head, indigo, pituitary, lower brain, left eye, ears, nose, nervous system. Crown, violet, white, pineal, upper brain, right eye. It's also going to be right, go back in the Kemetic lore, because you have the left and the right eye of Ra. They're talking about the pineal and pituitary gland. If you understand the relationship of melanin and how it operates and how light goes through the eye,